Mark Esper has taken part in a classified exercise to determine how Washington would respond to a Russian nuclear attack in Europe, according to officials.
The scenario included a European contingency, where you are conducting a war with Russia, and Russia decides to use a low-yield limited nuclear weapon against a site on NATO territory. And then you go through the conversation that you would have with the Secretary of Defense and then with the President, ultimately to decide how to respond. We simulated responding with a nuclear weapon.
Well, the exercises come as the US seeks to upgrade its nuclear capabilities. Earlier this month, the Department of Defense requested a military budget of over $740 billion for 2021. It said it wants an additional $4 billion for nuclear weapons spending. That's a 19% increase on the current budget. Russia's condemned what it says amounts to Washington's undermining of global stability.
We condemn such actions because, firstly, they clearly demonstrate Washington's readiness to follow the path of confrontation and further lower the threshold for using nuclear weapons. Instead of focusing on efforts to strengthen the arms control system, including the nuclear system, the United States is playing an extremely dangerous game.
Well, let's go live now to Peter Kuznick, a professor of history and director of the Nuclear Studies Institute at American University. Sir, thanks for joining us. Good to have you on today. I mean, this is something you would expect in a Cold War era scenario, isn't it? I mean, just how common is it for the military to practice these sorts of games, these sorts of scenarios?
Well, these kinds of war games are actually pretty common. They conduct them on a regular basis. But what's different now is the climate. The relations between the United States and Russia are very, very shaky right now. It was very recently, that the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists moved the hands of the doomsday clock to 100 seconds before midnight. That's the closest it's ever been. Right, in January of 2018, they moved it to 2 minutes before midnight. The last time they had done that was back in 1953, after the United States and the Soviet Union tested their hydrogen bombs. The fact that they moved it so close again is a reflection of just how precarious the global situation is now. In this exercise that you were mentioning, the situation is, the belief is that if there was a war between Russia and NATO, that NATO would have some conventional advantage and that Russia would respond with a tactical nuclear weapon. It's called a strategy of escalating to de-escalate. That would show NATO how serious Russia was and would hopefully deter further attack. And there are two possibilities. NATO could respond with conventional weapons, or it could respond with nuclear weapons. Over the years, they've simulated this kind of nuclear war, limited nuclear war, many times. What usually happens is that it escalates out of control. There is almost no scenario in which a limited nuclear war ends after each side shoots off one nuclear weapon. The much more likely scenario is that it continues to escalate, and then we're all finished.
Russia and America, obviously, they're not the only nuclear powers, and you mentioned quite rightly the doomsday clock, they're moving towards midnight. Is that because of this movement towards deploying so-called low-yield nuclear weapons, where something that was perhaps totally unmanageable in previous decades is now potentially a reality?
It has something to do with the low-yield nuclear weapons, but even beyond that, the situation is quite unstable right now. There's very little trust between the United States and Russia. We're dismantling our entire nuclear architecture. It began in 2002 when the U.S. announced it was doing away with the ABM treaty. It was shortly after that that Russia began developing its countermeasures. And then the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, then the INF treaty, which was abrogated. And now the only one left really that's significant is the New START treaty. And Putin has asked Trump to extend the New START treaty when it expires less than a year from now, in early February 2021, and Trump has so far not responded. Trump says he wants to have a broader treaty that includes China. China has shown no willingness at all to go along with that. You have to remember that the United States and Russia have about 93% of the world's nuclear weapons between us. China, on the other hand, has about 290 or 300 nuclear weapons. So China's nuclear policy is fundamentally different than the U.S. and the Russian nuclear policy. So China sees little interest in going along with this kind of agreement. But if the United States and Russia do not extend the New START treaty, then the danger is we go back to a 1980s style nuclear arms race. Trump has said he welcomes a nuclear arms race. That is insanity. But that's what Trump is looking toward. And he says we're going to win a nuclear arms race. Well, maybe the United States would win a nuclear arms race, but the world loses in a nuclear arms race. You have to remember that about 1985, the world had accumulated the equivalent of 1.5 million Hiroshima bombs. 1.5 million. And there were about close to 70,000 nuclear weapons in all. So right now we're down to about 14,000, 20% of what we used to have, which is still insane, and certainly more than enough to trigger nuclear winter and end pretty much all life on the planet. But because we even know that the latest studies show that a limited nuclear war between India and Pakistan, which 100 Hiroshima-sized nuclear weapons were used, could kill up to 2 billion people, send 5 million tons of smoke and soot into the atmosphere, destroy agriculture. I mean, so we're not playing with toys here. We're talking about something that poses an existential threat.